There are people who walk through life carrying entire worlds inside them, storms of emotion, quiet fears, hidden hopes, unresolved wounds. Yet you would never know it by looking at them. They appear calm, collected, composed. They say, "I'm fine," even when they're hurting. They smile even when they're exhausted. They listen to others, but rarely reveal what's happening within themselves. These are the people who don't share their feelings, not because they don't feel deeply, but because their relationship with vulnerability has been shaped by experiences that taught them silence is safer than exposure. Human beings don't withhold emotions for no reason. There is always a story behind emotional silence. A childhood where feelings were dismissed, relationships where vulnerability was punished, environments where expressing emotion was misunderstood as weakness. Many of these individuals learned early on that the world doesn't always handle emotions with care, so they learned to carry everything alone. And while this creates an illusion of strength, beneath it is a heart that has simply adapted to survive. People who don't share their feelings are often highly sensitive internally. They analyze, they reflect, they overthink. They're aware of their emotions, sometimes painfully aware, but they hold them in because opening up feels risky. They fear burdening others, fear being misunderstood, fear losing control, or fear appearing weak. To them, silence becomes a shield. Emotional independence becomes a form of self-protection. But emotional silence can also come from self-reliance. Some individuals genuinely prefer to process feelings internally. They feel more grounded when they reflect privately, rather than talking things out loud. They don't see emotions as something that must be shared to be valid. For them, privacy is not fear, it's comfort. Still, even the strongest internal processors need connection. Every person deserves a space where their emotions can be seen, heard, and accepted. And sometimes, people who don't share their feelings aren't waiting for someone to force them to open up. They're waiting for someone patient enough, safe enough, and gentle enough to make opening up feel possible. Many people who don't share their feelings grew up in environments where vulnerability felt unsafe, unpredictable, or simply unwelcomed. This early conditioning becomes the invisible blueprint for how they relate to emotions in adulthood. A child who expresses sadness and is told to stop crying, toughen up, or don't make a scene, eventually learns that feelings are problems, not signals. A child who tries to explain their hurt but is ignored, mocked, or punished learns that silence is safer than honesty. These early experiences shape the nervous system, teaching it that emotional expression leads to tension, conflict, rejection, or humiliation. So even when that child grows into an adult, the body still remembers, opening up is dangerous. This emotional training doesn't always come from trauma. Sometimes it comes from subtle patterns. Parents who were overwhelmed and unintentionally dismissive, families where feelings were never discussed, or cultures where emotional restraint was seen as maturity. Over time, the person internalizes the belief that expressing emotion only complicates situations, so the safest option is to keep everything inside. They develop a quiet strength that looks like composure, but is actually self-protection. When these individuals try to express something vulnerable, their mind often replays old memories. The time they were misunderstood, the moment someone laughed at their pain, or the silence that followed a heartfelt confession. Their brain associates vulnerability with danger, so it shuts down the urge to open up before the words even reach their tongue. Even when they want to share, they may feel a tightness in their chest or a voice inside saying, "Don't bother, it won't help," or "People won't understand you." These reactions are not a choice. They are reflexes built from years of emotional conditioning. This fear of vulnerability also comes with a deep desire to maintain stability. They may worry that expressing emotions could disrupt relationships, create tension, or make them seem weak. They often believe that others rely on them to be the strong one, so they suppress their feelings to protect the peace. They worry that showing hurt will make them a burden or invite pity, which for them feels worse than silence. Their emotional world becomes a private landscape, felt intensely but never spoken. People who grew up feeling unsafe with vulnerability also learn emotional hyper-independence. They become experts at handling their pain alone because experience taught them no one else will. They find comfort in self-reliance, even if it comes with loneliness. Sharing feelings becomes unnecessary in their mind, almost foreign, because they never had the experience of someone responding with compassion or understanding. Yet beneath this emotional silence lies a heart that feels deeply. These individuals often have rich inner lives, filled with overthinking, reflections, empathy, and sensitivity. They aren't cold or distant, they are careful. Their reluctance to open up is a survival skill they mastered early in life. And while this protective shield can be difficult to break, it exists for a reason. Once, long ago, it was the only thing that kept them emotionally safe. People who don't share their feelings often fear being misunderstood more than being unheard. To them, misunderstanding is not just a simple miscommunication. It feels like a personal failure, a painful distortion of their inner world. When they finally gather the courage to reveal something delicate and it gets misinterpreted, it leaves a bruise that takes a long time to heal. This fear becomes so strong that silence feels safer than trying to explain themselves. For these individuals, emotions are not surface-level experiences. They feel things deeply, but they also think deeply about those feelings. When they try to put their inner experience into words, they worry that language won't capture it properly. They fear saying too much, saying it wrong, or saying it in a way that others twist into something they never meant. This anxiety creates a constant internal debate. Should I say it? Will they get it? What if they judge me? By the time they're done overthinking, the moment to share has passed. Many times, they've tried opening up in the past and watched their feelings get minimized with phrases like "it's not that serious" or "you're overthinking." Being misunderstood in those moments feels like emotional invalidation, as if their inner world is invisible or irrelevant. That memory sticks, and the brain learns to withdraw to avoid the sting of being misread again. Even when surrounded by people who care, they often feel like others won't understand the complexity of their thoughts. They might see themselves as too complicated, too emotional, or too different. They carry an assumption that explaining themselves will require too much energy, too much vulnerability, or too much self-exposure. To them, the effort feels overwhelming, and the risk feels unnecessary. Another layer of this fear comes from the frustration of past conversations. Some people open up but then have to defend their emotions, justify them, or argue about their validity. This turns emotional expression into a debate, and instead of comfort, they walk away feeling even more alone. Over time, they conclude that silence is more peaceful than being emotionally misunderstood by the wrong person. This fear also stems from a desire to avoid conflict. When someone misunderstands their feelings, it can lead to arguments, tension, or awkwardness, things they would rather avoid at any cost. They prioritize emotional stability, even if it means emotional isolation. They would rather carry the weight of their feelings privately than risk emotional chaos. There is also a deeper, quieter fear. Once someone misunderstands them, their image, their intentions, or their character might be permanently misjudged. People who guard their emotions closely often care deeply about how they are perceived. They don't want their feelings twisted into something that changes the way others view them. So instead of sharing, they keep their thoughts internal. They journal, they overthink, they distract themselves, or they simply endure. Not because they don't want connection, but because they fear that revealing their emotional truth will lead to confusion instead of comfort. And for them, being misunderstood hurts far more than staying silent ever will. People who don't share their feelings often fear being misunderstood more than being unheard. To them, misunderstanding is not just a simple miscommunication. It feels like a personal failure, a painful distortion of their inner world. When they finally gather the courage to reveal something delicate and it gets misinterpreted, it leaves a bruise that takes a long time to heal. This fear becomes so strong that silence feels safer than trying to explain themselves. For these individuals, emotions are not surface-level experiences. They feel things deeply, but they also think deeply about those feelings. When they try to put their inner experience into words, they worry that language won't capture it properly. They fear saying too much, saying it wrong, or saying it in a way that others twist into something they never meant. This anxiety creates a constant internal debate. Should I say it? Will they get it? What if they judge me? By the time they're done overthinking, the moment to share has passed. Many times, they've tried opening up in the past and watched their feelings get minimized with phrases like "it's not that serious" or "you're overthinking." Being misunderstood in those moments feels like emotional invalidation, as if their inner world is invisible or irrelevant. That memory sticks, and the brain learns to withdraw to avoid the sting of being misread again. Even when surrounded by people who care, they often feel like others won't understand the complexity of their thoughts. They might see themselves as too complicated, too emotional, or too different. They carry an assumption that explaining themselves will require too much energy, too much vulnerability, or too much self-exposure. To them, the effort feels overwhelming and the risk feels unnecessary. Another layer of this fear comes from the frustration of past conversations. Some people open up but then have to defend their emotions, justify them, or argue about their validity. This turns emotional expression into a debate, and instead of comfort, they walk away feeling even more alone. Over time, they conclude that silence is more peaceful than being emotionally misunderstood by the wrong person. This fear also stems from a desire to avoid conflict. When someone misunderstands their feelings, it can lead to arguments, tension, or awkwardness, things they would rather avoid at any cost. They prioritize emotional stability, even if it means emotional isolation. They would rather carry the weight of their feelings privately than risk emotional chaos. There is also a deeper, quieter fear. Once someone misunderstands them, their image, their intentions, or their character might be permanently misjudged. People who guard their emotions closely often care deeply about how they are perceived. They don't want their feelings twisted into something that changes the way others view them. So instead of sharing, they keep their thoughts internal. They journal, they overthink, they distract themselves, or they simply endure. Not because they don't want connection, but because they fear that revealing their emotional truth will lead to confusion instead of comfort. And for them, being misunderstood hurts far more than staying silent ever will. People who don't share their feelings often struggle with a sense of emotional self-reliance. They have learned, sometimes through painful experience, that depending on others for emotional support is risky. Early in life, they may have reached out for comfort only to be met with indifference, dismissal, or even ridicule. Over time, they internalize the idea that their emotions are safest when kept private. This creates a pattern of self-sufficiency where they process everything internally, becoming their own confidant, therapist, and sounding board. This self-reliance has its benefits. It allows them to navigate challenges without burdening others, to maintain composure in crises, and to develop a rich inner world full of introspection and insight. They become deeply familiar with their own minds, understanding their triggers, patterns, and emotional landscapes better than most. Their ability to soothe, reflect, and analyze becomes a strength, giving them resilience that outwardly expressive people may not always develop. However, this pattern comes at a cost. Constantly holding emotions inward can create isolation and a feeling of disconnection from others. Even when surrounded by friends, family, or colleagues, they may feel unseen because they rarely allow anyone to witness their inner experience. Relationships may feel surface level as others interact with the composed exterior rather than the emotional reality within. Over time, this can lead to loneliness even when they are not physically alone. Self-reliance also creates a kind of hyper-awareness of emotional control. They are constantly monitoring themselves, deciding which feelings are safe to acknowledge internally and which must remain suppressed. This hyper-vigilance is exhausting. It means that even small emotional fluctuations demand mental energy to regulate, interpret, and contain. As a result, they may appear calm, detached, or unemotional, even though internally they are navigating a complex and active emotional world. The fear of vulnerability reinforces this self-reliance. Sharing feelings involves risk of judgment, risk of misunderstanding, and risk of emotional exposure. People who don't share often calculate that the potential negative outcomes outweigh the benefits of expression. By relying solely on themselves, they maintain control and minimize potential harm. It becomes a protective strategy that feels necessary for survival, even if it also limits connection and intimacy. Ultimately, their emotional self-reliance is a paradox. It gives them independence, strength, and insight, but it also keeps them emotionally distant from others. Their challenge is learning that seeking support or sharing feelings does not necessarily weaken them. Rather, it can enhance relationships, foster trust, and deepen human connection. Recognizing that they can maintain control while still opening up is a crucial step toward balancing self-reliance with emotional intimacy. People who don't share their feelings often struggle because they lack the emotional vocabulary to express what's happening inside them. From a young age, many of these individuals were not taught how to name, categorize, or process their emotions. Instead of hearing words like frustrated, anxious, hurt, or overwhelmed, they may have been told to calm down, stop being dramatic, or don't feel that way. This lack of language creates a gap between their internal experience and their ability to communicate it. Without words, feelings remain trapped, swirling internally without a channel for release. The absence of emotional vocabulary makes sharing inherently risky. Even when they want to open up, they may struggle to find the right words, fearing that what they say will be inadequate, confusing, or misunderstood. They may feel that no one can truly understand the complexity of what they feel. This internal barrier reinforces silence and creates a pattern of emotional suppression that becomes habitual over time. Moreover, lacking emotional language affects how they process feelings internally. When we can name and articulate emotions, we can reflect on them, analyze their sources, and integrate them into our understanding of ourselves. Without that language, feelings become vague and amorphous, making it harder to make sense of emotional experiences. People in this situation often overthink or ruminate because they are trying to translate feelings into logic without the proper tools. This mental effort is exhausting, yet it feels necessary because the emotions demand acknowledgement even if words fail. The inability to express feelings also impacts relationships. When someone cannot articulate their inner state, others may misinterpret their behavior or assume indifference. Friends, family, or partners may not realize the depth of what is going on internally, leading to distance, misunderstandings, and frustration on both sides. Meanwhile, the person who is silent may feel unseen and isolated, deepening their internal sense of emotional loneliness. Developing emotional vocabulary is a key step in breaking this pattern. It requires intentional reflection and self-observation, noticing bodily sensations, mental patterns, and subtle emotional cues, and linking them to descriptive language. Journaling, therapy, or guided emotional exercises can help individuals map their internal world onto words. As vocabulary grows, sharing feelings becomes more feasible, less daunting, and less prone to misinterpretation. Over time, the ability to articulate emotions strengthens both self-understanding and connection with others, allowing what was once trapped internally to find expression in ways that foster intimacy and authenticity. People who don't share their feelings often fear emotional overwhelm, both for themselves and for others. They worry that expressing their emotions will trigger a flood, they won't be able to control, or that will be too intense for those around them to handle. This fear is not irrational. Emotions can feel like powerful currents that sweep through the mind and body, making one vulnerable, exposed, and unsteady. For someone who has learned to manage feelings internally, the prospect of releasing them externally can seem threatening. They may anticipate crying, anger, or anxiety that could spiral, and the safest option becomes silence. This fear also extends to the reactions of others. People who hold back often assume that showing emotions will burden friends, family, or colleagues. They worry that their sadness will make someone uncomfortable, that their anger will provoke conflict, or that their vulnerability will be seen as weakness. In this way, emotional withholding becomes an act of protection, not just of themselves, but of others. They want to prevent discomfort, rejection, or strained relationships, so they internalize rather than externalize. The anticipation of emotional overwhelm is often rooted in past experiences. Perhaps in childhood, expressing feelings led to scolding, dismissal, or ridicule. Perhaps in previous relationships, vulnerability was met with judgment or avoidance. These patterns reinforce the idea that emotions are dangerous, uncontrollable, or unsafe to share. Over time, the individual learns to preemptively suppress feelings before they even surface, creating a deeply ingrained habit of emotional silence. Internally, this constant containment can be exhausting. They may spend hours analyzing, ruminating, and attempting to regulate emotions in solitude. While outwardly composed, their internal world is active and often turbulent. This internal management demands energy and focus, leaving them drained, anxious, or emotionally distant. It also limits their capacity to connect with others fully because they are never fully present. Part of themselves is always reserved, always guarded. Paradoxically, avoiding emotional overwhelm can prevent growth and genuine connection. Expressing emotions, even imperfectly, allows for release, understanding, and relational bonding. But for those who fear the intensity, the comfort of silence outweighs the benefits of sharing. Healing for these individuals involves learning to tolerate emotional intensity gradually, starting with small disclosures, safe spaces, or trusted listeners. Over time, they may discover that feelings once shared are manageable, and that vulnerability does not inevitably lead to chaos or rejection, but instead opens the door to authentic connection and relief. People who don't share their feelings often appear calm and composed to the outside world, but this appearance hides a significant emotional cost. Maintaining a facade of control requires constant monitoring of thoughts, words, and actions. Every interaction becomes a careful negotiation. They filter what they say, anticipate how others might react, and suppress impulses that could reveal their true emotions. This level of self-regulation is exhausting and can create chronic tension in both mind and body, even if no one else notices. Their calm is not absence of emotion. It is a carefully constructed defense. This effort to maintain composure can lead to emotional bottling. Feelings that are not expressed externally do not disappear. They accumulate internally. Over time, unspoken sadness, anger, anxiety, or disappointment can intensify, creating stress, irritability, or even physical symptoms such as headaches, muscle tension, or fatigue. Because these individuals rarely vent or seek support, the pressure continues to build, sometimes manifesting in sudden outbursts or emotional breakdowns when the internal load becomes too heavy to manage alone. The psychological impact of constant emotional restraint is profound. People who habitually suppress feelings may struggle with intimacy and trust. Relationships can feel distant because their silence creates a barrier between them and others. Even close friends or partners may feel they do not fully know the person, which can create misunderstandings or misalignments in expectations. Meanwhile, the individual feels isolated, longing for connection but unable to risk vulnerability. Over time, the pattern reinforces itself. The more they keep feelings hidden, the more they internalize the belief that emotions are private, unsafe, or unwelcome. This belief shapes future behavior, making it increasingly difficult to express feelings in new situations. They may avoid topics that could trigger emotion, withdraw in moments of potential conflict, or laugh off discomfort instead of addressing it. Emotional suppression becomes second nature, a coping mechanism that protects them from perceived harm, but also prevents genuine engagement with their own inner life. Healing for these individuals involves recognizing that calmness does not require emotional invisibility. It is possible to maintain composure while allowing emotions to be expressed in safe, constructive ways. Techniques like journaling, therapy, or mindful conversations can help them practice articulating feelings without fear of judgment. Over time, they learn that expressing emotions does not destroy stability, it strengthens it. They discover that true calm is not the absence of emotion, but the presence of regulated, acknowledged, and shared feelings, allowing for deeper connection with themselves and others. People who don't share their feelings often open up only when they deeply trust someone, making their vulnerability rare and highly significant. Trust is not given lightly for these individuals. It is earned through consistent demonstration of safety, empathy, and non-judgment. Their past experiences, where emotions were dismissed, ridiculed, or misunderstood, have conditioned them to protect themselves by remaining silent. Therefore, the act of revealing their inner world is not casual. It is a calculated risk that requires assurance the listener will respond with care and understanding. When they finally choose to share, the act is both courageous and intimate. They may start slowly, offering small glimpses of emotion or subtle hints of what they feel, carefully testing the response before diving deeper. Each disclosure is weighed, measured, and filtered through their internal assessment of safety. They observe reactions closely, interpreting tone, body language, and empathy to gauge whether their feelings are being honored. If the response is supportive, it can feel profoundly relieving and validating, reinforcing the belief that emotional openness can be safe. If it is negative or dismissive, it confirms their fears and pushes them back into silence. This selective vulnerability also means that when they do share, it carries great depth. They are often articulate, reflective, and precise, offering insights into their inner experiences that others might overlook or underestimate. Their rare disclosures can transform relationships, fostering intimacy, understanding, and trust that is far deeper than casual sharing. Friends, partners, or family members who witness this trust are often deeply moved because they recognize the emotional risk their loved one has taken. However, the rarity of such openness can also create challenges. People around them may misinterpret their silence as disinterest, emotional detachment, or lack of affection, not realizing that trust and connection are guiding principles behind when and how they express themselves. This dynamic requires patience and empathy from those who care about them, as forcing disclosure or demanding emotional transparency can backfire, causing them to retreat further. The key to supporting someone who shares feelings only under trust is to respect boundaries, provide consistent empathy, and create an environment where emotional expression is safe. Over time, repeated positive experiences can expand their sense of security, allowing them to gradually share more freely. They learn that opening up is not dangerous but a means of connection and growth. Their selective vulnerability, once a protective mechanism, becomes a bridge, connecting the depth of their internal world with the hearts of others who value and honor it. This rare and cautious trust, when nurtured, leads to profoundly authentic relationships built on respect, understanding, and emotional resonance.